In today's video, I'm going to show you a new technique for painting with watercolours that you probably haven't seen before. Do you do the thing that I do where you go outside and you look at something and you sort of play this game in your head thinking, if I was going to paint that, how would I do it? I was playing this game the other day outside my back door. There are some bricks on the brick wall of a neighbour has, and I saw this white stuff on the surface of the bricks. I've seen it before. I looked it up on the internet. It's got a name. It's called efflorescence. It's when the salt comes to the top of the brickwork, and I was thinking, I don't quite know how I'd paint that and how I'd get that opacity and that texture. And I went down this rabbit hole of sort of playing with a texture technique, and I discovered something new. Now, is it new? I don't know. Probably someone's done it before, but it's certainly new to me, and I think it'll be new to you. And I discovered lots of different ways of using this technique, because once I'd got going on the bricks, I was thinking of all different uses that I could do with this new thing. You've probably seen the thumbnail. We're going to be using cling film, or some countries call it saran wrap or sandwich wrap. We're not going to be doing the usual thing with it. We're going to actually be using it to paint. I've talked for long enough, so let's get started. So I built a wall and Gimlet paid for it. No, Gimlet didn't pay for it. Gimlet doesn't pay for anything. He's a complete scrounger, like all cats. What I've got here is some titanium white. Now, you might be nervous of using white paint with watercolour. I've done a video all about that, which I'll leave in the description of this video. And you certainly don't want to be mixing white in to lighten your colours or anything like that. It adds a lot of chalkiness or opacity, but that's exactly what I want for this effect. Now, this is titanium white. This one is listed as a watercolour. Titanium white is sometimes listed as gouache. Whites that are listed as watercolour whites are often zinc white or Chinese white, which tends to be a combination of both zinc and titanium. This one is the more opaque one. As far as I'm concerned, if you're going to use white at all, you may as well get a good one. And it's the opacity that I want for this technique. So I've got my cling film here. If you don't call it cling film in the country where you live, you know what this stuff is. It's just what we call it here in the UK. And rather than put paint on here and leave it to dry like we have done many times on this channel before, which is a great technique, we're actually going to paint with it. So I'm going to scrunch it up like this, and we're going to pick up paint with it. Now, if you're thinking, well, I don't have any tube paint or any white paint, we're not just going to be using white opaque paint today. There are other colours in your palette which may be quite opaque. If you've got any buff titanium, any Naples yellow, those are colours that are quite opaque. And all I'm going to do now is just dab, and let's see what happens. Now, be aware that as this paint dries, it will soften a little bit. And if you want a less bright effect, you can just add more water to it. That'll make the paint a little bit more transparent. But as I said, when it dries, you will notice a lot of softening. You can also, any way you want to, take some clean water and slightly soften the effect. If you use a light touch, you still retain some of those really interesting speckled marks. I was quite pleased with this brick wall, actually. Let me know if you'd like a tutorial on ways of painting brickwork, because there's lots of different techniques I used here, even though I knocked it up very, very quickly. Now, if you don't have any tube paints at all, you can use pan paints. These aren't pan paints, but they are dried. And what I would do in this case is take a really cheap acrylic brush like this and a tiny bit of water and agitate and place into the wells until I get some thick, sticky paint. Now, because this white is watercolour, you can also soften it later on. So if it dries and you were pleased with it initially, but now you think it looks a bit harsh, just take some clean water on top and soften the effect. I'm really happy with how this turned out. Now, one thing to mention at this point is that this is single-use plastic, but even though this is not a good thing for the environment, because we're artists, we can just rinse the paint off and hang it up to dry. I like to hang mine up. If you shut a kitchen cupboard door so that you just trap things in the doorway, that's how I like to hang things like that up to dry, and then we can reuse them infinite times. I've got some paint here now, and this is a little bit more thin and watery, because when I discovered this technique, I then started to think, where would I see marks like this? And I thought about certain types of fruit like pears, and also things like autumn leaves. So let's have a look at doing this in a botanical way. Now, it's going to be quite hard to be accurate with this and not end up going outside of the pear. So what we want to do is mask. And you can do this really simply just by placing some magazine paper around. Notice that I've torn the paper, not cut it. You don't want to end up with an effect where you're sort of looking like the edge of a stencil. You don't have to get the same shape as the object. Just make sure that it's a torn edge so that, you know, as you work, it won't really notice too much. I'm going to do a bit more of this and then we'll see how it looks. Now, I'm finding it's quite important to keep moving this stuff around because otherwise it tends to flatten out and you get quite large flat marks appearing instead of these nice little speckles. And I would also, in a subject like this, consider blending in places, perhaps using a little of the same colour down near the base or over to one side. And we're getting a much more natural look than we would with splattering. Remember, if any marks look unnatural, you can just adjust them a little bit. Really pleased with this effect. Now, one of the first things I thought about when I saw this technique was foliage, because it seemed to work almost as well as using one of those expensive tree brushes. I also wanted to know what would happen when I put it on damp paper. So let's have a look at that. So what I want to do is get the idea of sort of some foliage or bushes growing, but I want the lower part to be a lot more blended. So what I'm going to do is put clean water at the bottom here. I'm also just going to dot around the edge so it doesn't end in, you know, a hard straight line. I've got some green paint, some transparent yellow and some ultramarine, and let's start in the middle with our green and really getting some beautiful effects here. Let's get a bit of dark in here with the blue and see how we come up to the edge here. We start to go onto partially dry paper, going in with some yellow now. I feel like as well as foliage it would work really well for sort of underwater type things. And if I were doing something like a tree or some foliage, I'd be inclined to go in as well in the center with some brush strokes, just to give it a little bit of solidity. But look at these amazing edge marks we've got, and without any kind of tree brush, just some plastic sandwich wrap. So once I'd played with paint for a bit, I started thinking, could I apply masking fluid like this? So that's what we're going to do next. But before we do that, please don't forget to drop a like on this video, click that thumbs up, leave me a comment, share with somebody else that you think might find this stuff useful. Most of all, I'd love you to subscribe to my channel. It's completely free, and unlike most art channels here on YouTube, we are fully cat approved. So when I saw the sort of crisp marks that I was getting, the little square and pointed edges with this medium, I started to think about the work of, I believe his name is Joe Francis Dowden, and he does lots of paintings in watercolour that have things like forest pathways with lots of leaves scattered, and he does it by splattering and working in layers with masking fluid. So I wondered if we could get a similar effect. And what you want to do with your masking fluid is always decant it before you use it, because you don't want to tip this stuff over. And these little bottles, they always seem to fall over really easily. You don't want to get it on your clothing. Although there are things on sale that can remove it from cloth, you need, you know, if you drop a whole bottle of this on your trousers, unless you're wearing, you know, Chanel or Dior, it's going to be cheaper to throw the trousers away than buy enough product to remove this from your clothing. So we've got some here, and what we'll do again is I'm just going to dip in. Now that is too much, obviously it's just going to leave a big blob. So you can either dab out on a palette or using some paper towel, and I'm going to just start pressing like this. Now this stuff dries quickly, so if you want to use the plastic wrap, again, you want to rinse that straight away in water. I'm going to get a little bit more. Oh, I've used too much there, haven't I? I could have done about 20 paintings. I'm going to put a little bit more down towards the base, and now we let it dry. Now my masking fluid is dry. What we want to do now is put colours on top that are fairly dark, because what the masking fluid will do is reserve those yellow areas. And just like the artist I mentioned, we could of course go in and do this technique multiple times. In other words, you could go in again. Do be aware, however, that if you're pressing on top, it is possible to remove previous layers. So you have to have a light touch. So I'm going to come in like this, put some more green up top. And I'm really just trying to get an idea of what's possible. And if you're using this in a larger painting, I would advise stretching your paper. I'll leave a link to a video in the description of this one so you can see how paper stretching is done. Now we're going to let this get completely dry before we remove the masking fluid and see the effect we get. So once it's dry, you're just going to take clean fingers and make little circular movements. You can use a firm eraser as well. Make sure everything's dry or you risk smudging your work. Once I've loosened all of this, I'll tip it over a dustbin. Pretty happy with this result for a first pass. As I said, I would be inclined to repeat this process several times with several layers of paint before taking the masking fluid off. You can also, of course, go in and further work into your area. And I think this would be really beautiful for a pile of autumn leaves. We've got lots of random square edge marks that we could never really achieve with splattering. At one point, I started dabbing my light paint onto a very dark surface and I got a look of almost fireflies or stardust. And I thought, what a fantastic technique for nighttime or starry galaxy paintings. I'm going to take my white paint, I'm just going to tint it yellow. I've got some azo yellow here. Many of the cadmium yellows are somewhat opaque, so you could try one of those too. The most opaque one would be Naples yellow. And if you're using tube paint and it's going on top of a dark colour, you want to keep it as straight from the tube as possible with as little water as you can manage. Obviously, I need a tiny bit of water to pick up this yellow. Now let's scrunch and apply. Now do make sure your first layer is completely dry, otherwise you do risk picking up some of that darker colour. And what a pretty effect. So do let me know in the comments if you're going to have a go at this technique. If you have seen it somewhere before, let me know that as well. And before you leave this video, don't forget to have a look in the video description. If I've mentioned any other videos, they'll be linked down there. You can also grab some free downloadable PDFs. There's also a free watercolor painting course that you can take for no money whatsoever. And if you're interested in really unusual watercolor techniques, you're going to love a video that I made a few weeks back using techniques that I'd pulled in from other mediums such as printmaking and ink work. You can watch that video right now.